Okay. Well, Cathy has actually already introduced us in a way. The first speaker tonight is Dr. Mark Benbow, who is the ex officio member of the board as the director of the Arlington Historical Museum. He is, the doctor does not mean that he's a medical doctor. That means he's a doctor of, in this case, American history. He teaches at Marymount University. Cathy Hix, who you've already met tonight, is not just the Arlington Historical Society president. She is also a retired school teacher. And again, not just a teacher, but she was head of the entire Arlington Public School social studies program. So she led the history, the teaching of history in our public schools as her final position before she retired a couple years ago. So with that, over to you, Dr. Benbow.
And I will say before Mark gets started, it would be great if everybody would mute now. I'm going to mute, but everybody should be mute, video off, except for Mark.
Except for me. If you go ahead and go to the next slide, and go ahead. There we go. And so thank you all. I'm glad you all could come for the annual meeting and for the presentation. Basically, Cathy and I are both going to be talking about the Hume School, now the Arlington Historical Museum. I'm going to give a little bit of the history of it, a little bit about how the museum developed out of the school. If you haven't been there, you need to come. It's a very cool building. It's the oldest schoolhouse in Arlington, built in 1891. It's been preserved since 1960 by the Arlington Historical Society and has exhibits covering all of Arlington history, as much as I can cram into our exhibit space, from pre-Columbian times to more recent events. And we do have temporary exhibits that we change frequently as well. Our next temporary exhibit is going to be on Upton's Hill, which of course has been in the Arlington news lately. But the building itself, go ahead and go to the next one, stands on South Arlington Ridge Road in South Arlington. This is the insurance map from the era showing where the Hume School was, a little tiny plot of land there in the Arlington Ridge neighborhood. The county bought the land from Alexandria County resident Frank Hume, who I'll talk about in just a minute.
Okay, that's okay, isn't it?
He sold the property to the county for $250 and then donated extra land for what's now the parking lot. There we go. So they bought the land from Frank Hume for $250. Hume donated extra land, what's now part of the parking lot. Then it was a playground and that long staircase that goes down along the back. If you've been at the Hume School, you know which one I'm talking about. The school itself actually opened in 1893 and wasn't just a school, it was also a community center for the local community with meetings of the PTA and local community groups as well. So it doubled as a community center. Now, Frank Hume himself, there's Mr. Hume. We have a big portrait of him in the museum. Was born in Culpeper County, was an enlisted man in the Confederate Army during the Civil War, was wounded at Gettysburg. After the Civil War, he became a wholesale grocer, which in the post-Civil War era also meant he was a whiskey dealer. We don't generally think of grocers as whiskey dealers, but that was really common in the era. Grocers would buy barrels of whiskey from various distillers and then rebottle it under their own private labels. And we have some bottles empty from Frank Hume's Warwick whiskey. Warwick was the name of the property he had in what's now Alexandria. And the Warwick neighborhood in Alexandria is where his estate was. He became a fairly wealthy man as a wholesale grocer. He was one of the biggest and most important in DC. Made his fortune in selling groceries, i.e. things including whiskey. He also served in the Virginia legislature, several terms there, ran for the US Congress as an independent with Republican support, but was not elected. And he was one of the first to come up with the idea of the Memorial Bridge that would link Arlington with Washington. He really pushed for this. It wasn't built till several decades after he had passed away, but he was one of the early leaders of the movements to build what becomes Memorial Bridge, linking Arlington House with the Lincoln Memorial. In part, this was for the symbolic value of the bridge, but part also was for economic development in Arlington, that it was felt that there needed to be another bridge in addition to the bridges that already existed. So this is the man that donated, sold some of the land. It was not, he did not gouge the county. That was very much a fair price he charged for that little bit of land, but then also donated it. And his donation becomes particularly important because there was a condition in the sale that the land had to be used for educational purposes. And this is going to play a really important role when we get to the late 1950s. Now, the building itself was designed by this man, Stanley Simmons, who was born in Charles County, Maryland, came to Washington, D.C. as a boy, went to University of Maryland, went to MIT up in Massachusetts, and was a prominent local architect. The drawing here, the caricature, is by Clifford Berryman, who was for many decades the very popular cartoonist that did editorial cartoons for the Washington Evening Star. If you were anybody in Washington, you wanted your caricature done by Clifford Berryman, and he did in 1900, not long after he had designed the Hume School, Mr. Simmons. He designed close to 300 buildings in Washington, D.C. Of course, the one we're most interested in is the Hume School, which was one of his early designs. Go ahead, and I'll show you one of his, I'll note he's only about 20 years old when he did this. He's born in 1872. So he's very much a young architect, just starting off when he did this. And you can see the difference between his architectural drawing and the actual school building as it was built. The roof is somewhat different. The entryway is a little bit different with the staircase on the architectural drawing. But this is also, besides the architectural drawing, the earliest picture we have of the school from a pamphlet published in 1907, A History of Alexandria County by Crandall Mackey, who, of course, everybody in the county is familiar with from his raid on the brothels and gambling halls in Roslyn. But he was very much a promoter of the county. And in the various important landmarks of the county, he included the Hume School. Now, the first teacher is this woman, Abby Dishman, born in King George County, Virginia, went to the Green Female Seminary in the Blue Ridge Mountains. She took a competitive exam and scored 99%. I'd be curious what the 1% is that she missed, but she scored very, very well and became the first teacher at the Hume School. She became the teacher and principal, so she was really busy. And when the school actually opened, it says here, first teacher at Hume School, it should say 1893 to 1902, because the school opened in 1893, but she was hired before they opened. But she was very busy because there were classrooms down below and up on the second floor. She probably had some help, but she did teach until 1902 when she got married. And as was the tradition at the time, she resigned her teaching position when she was married. She didn't quit teaching forever, though. She came back in World War I when there was a shortage of teachers and taught in Maryland, and retired in 1934. She lived for a long time after. She visited the Hume School in 1968 and reminisced about teaching at the museum, what had become the museum, as its first teacher, and gave us a number of artifacts which we have on display on this case up on the second floor of the museum. We have an exhibit of some things from the first days of Hume School, including her teacher's license, a textbook, the set of keys from the school, and so on. But she was the first teacher at the Hume School. So the school itself was open until 1956. It was never the little one-room schoolhouse. It always had multiple rooms and multiple grades. The first floor, which is now the main exhibit hall, there is a classroom for grades 1 and 2 and a classroom for grades 3 and 4 and the boys' bathroom. On the second floor, there's a small auditorium, the classroom for grades 5 and 6, the principal's office, which we now have set up as a model schoolroom, so you can see what the schoolrooms would have looked like, and the girls' bathroom. And if you look at the picture, you can see this picture from 1919. You'll see in the back over on the left side, just in front of the entryway, and that cool ironwork we have, you can see the 3 teachers. So they had 3 teachers and a principal plus a maintenance man that kept the building running and kept the heater going. And it had a coal furnace and only a partial basement at the time. And we don't believe it had electricity initially either. But this is, you can see, it's not a big school. This is Virginia at the time, so schools are segregated. So it was the white kids from the local neighborhood that had to walk from basically about several miles in radius around the school, which, if you're familiar with the area, meant there was definitely a long walk uphill to get to school in the mornings, especially on a cold winter morning. I bet that was a pretty long hike up. Probably a little easier going home when it was downhill to get back home. But this is, you get an idea about the number of students that the school had in its early days. It was never a particularly large school. We've been tracking down photos. This is one that just came up. The Milner Group, that Cathy's going to talk about their proposal for revamping the museum and preserving the Hume School in the future, found this in the New York City archives. Don't know how it ended up in New York City, but there's a couple in front and another person in the back. This is a 1917 Willis Overland. I wish I knew what color it was. You can't tell. There's a very cool photograph of the same type of car in a bright emerald green online. So I like to imagine that this is an emerald green car, but we have no way of knowing. But by coincidence, the school is in the background. So I'm assuming it's by coincidence. They weren't taking a picture saying, hey, here's the school as well. But this is one of the earlier photos of the school that we have. We have another photo then from a couple years after. You can jump ahead one. There we go. Here we go in 1920. When we first saw a real low resolution copy of this photo, we saw the windows look boarded up and thought, well, that's odd. Then when we got the nice high resolution, we realized, oh, wait, no, those are shutters that it closed. But it doesn't appear to have electricity yet. It's all grass around it that the kids could go out and play in. It did have plumbing. And you'll note the tree over on the left side there, on the DC side. That shows up in all the photos. It gets bigger and bigger, and we think we still have the trunk to that tree in our garden in the side, because there's definitely remains of a very old tree trunk in our garden right at that spot. But you can see, you get an idea of the size of the building, and you'll note no immediate neighbors. That changes with the next photo. Sorry, still the neighbors. That's coming up the next one. But you can see this is 1930. You've got electrical wires running down the street, none to the building yet, and the building is now painted yellow. We don't know what shade of yellow, but it was painted yellow. You can see the kids all out playing, and it looks like they added a parking lot. So they're modernizing it. The trees are a bit bigger. You still have the playground in the side. You can still have the great view from the back. And then when we get to 1940 with the next photo, now we have electrical wires running to the school itself. They've added some teeter-totters, some seesaws to the front. Presumably you could still park there. It's still painted yellow, but the school at this point has been around for 50 years. Not quite open for 50 years, but coming up to that 50-year anniversary. But it's getting at this point already closer to the end of its lifespan. And in 1956, the school had pretty much outlived its usefulness as a school. This is the last class of third grade students up on the second floor with their teacher. There is new fire and safety codes. There was a fire escape in the back of the building, but it was all rusty and no longer met code. It was still a coal-heated building in a half-dug-out basement that just wasn't very efficient. And retrofitting the school just didn't make any sense at this point. And there are other schools opening in the area. We have on display in the museum the architect's drawings for what becomes Oak Ridge Elementary School that was found at the school some years ago and donated to the museum. But at this point, the building is just too small and out of date. So the county began working to sell the property, to subdivide it, tear down the old school building, and sell the subdivided lot to developers, which sounds familiar. This is where the deed that they had arranged with Frank Hume came into play, specifically with Margaret Hume Burge, who steps in. It's the granddaughter of Frank Hume, who says, wait a minute. Go ahead and hop to the next slide, if you please. Wait a minute. The arrangement with the county said the land reverts to the Hume family if the property ever ceased to be used for educational purposes. The county can't sell the land for private use. So basically they made a three-way arrangement between the county, the Hume family, and the brand new Arlington Historical Society. It had just been founded just 3-4 years before to deed over the old schoolhouse for use as a museum. And in December 1961, the Arlington Historical Society took over the Hume School and probably promptly wondered what they'd just gotten into, because it had not been used except for storage for 5 years. We've got a picture in the next slide. AHS is inspecting the building. It needed new paint job. The brickwork they found was nice and solid. The bones, as they say, were good in the building. The joists and studs were all fine. They still are. But the basement was only partly excavated. It wasn't finished. It still had 7 tons of coal, which had increasingly fallen out of use as fuel. So they had a terrible time trying to find a way to get rid of it. Scattered animal bones and trash from animals getting into the basement. The first floor had an embossed sheet iron ceiling, which, boy, I really wish we still had. Apparently, there's still some pieces of it up there, but it was not kept. Nowadays, of course, that's valuable when you go to an antique building and you look for the old sheet iron ceiling. Don't have it anymore, but it had it then. But more importantly, the whole first floor was piled ceiling high with broken school desks and old discarded furniture. Basically, it was the school district's trash heap for school desks. The second floor, the stairs were in terrible condition. The walls had all been stripped of plaster to reveal the woodwork beneath. broken window glass, and disgustingly, birds had been nesting up there for quite some time with the mess they had left behind. So we do have other photos I don't have in the presentation of what they see. The school is basically a mess. So the Arlington Historical Society began a major fundraising campaign and used things like this next slide. This is the really cool ironwork that's up front, pointing this out to people, saying, look at this cool stuff that's been preserved. We can still preserve this building. It's got the beautiful ironwork. The brickwork is still nice. It's architecturally sound. We just need to redo the inside of it. And the campaign was successful. They did raise money from donors and began restoration a year into the campaign in September 1962. It took about 6 months. They then set up a museum. This is the timeline. Showing the museum opened to the public in September of 1963. We've still, at the Historical Society, been working on it ever since. They renovated the basement in September of 1970 and finished the basement. They added a new fence, a parking lot in 1987. We got a new furnace in 1993. They put in a French drain that ended years of wet basement troubles in 96. My favorite is in October of 2014. I was here for this. The bell, which is still the original bell, is still up in the tower, and we let guests ring it when they come by. And it jammed in mid-swing. Somebody pulled it too hard or something, and it jammed. So the fire department, for an exercise, took one of their ladder trucks and went up and unjammed the rope for us and unjammed the bell. Somebody asked, what can you tell us about the bell? It still works. I don't know who made it or anything else about it, unfortunately. But it is still up there. It does still ring. And we ring it for special occasions. Most recently, we had a new roof installed, paid for by insurance, when there was a bad hailstorm that damaged the roof, and we had to get a new one. Fortunately, they found the structure under the roof was still good. But we did start on the museum. 1962, a music store donated 5 big display cases that we still have. The museum opened to the public and was renamed the Arlington Historical Museum. We used to have exhibits on all 3 floors, had an exhibit in the basement of photographs, had model rooms for like what a parlor would look like in a Victorian home upstairs, as well as a meeting space. We renovated and added new lighting to it. I began running temporary exhibits in 2010, and we run about 3 or 4 temporary exhibits every year. The next one again will be on Upton's Hill. And in 2016, we started the Museum in a Box program. Basically, we got one of those little carts with artifacts that kids can handle. And I've gone to schools on various occasions or various county events to set up and allow people to handle the displays. It's artifacts that are genuine, but ones people can handle from the collection without danger. So it's nothing particularly incredibly rare or anything fragile. But that's proved to be fairly popular, such as going to the opening May Day celebrations at Potomac Overlook Park, which I'm looking forward to. Hope they can start running again next year. But the museum is continuing to grow. It's really outgrown a lot of its space, and a lot of what had been exhibit space on the 2nd floor and down the basement is now storage. And that's one of the issues that Cathy is going to talk about as she takes over on her presentation. But we're proud to open the museum, proud to have the museum. This is one of the temporary exhibits. And we're proud to have a museum to tell the story of the county for the people in the area that want to come see it.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to go ahead and pick up right here. And
well, before you do, can I just get in a couple questions about the
absolutely, because then I can flash back if they need to see a slide.
Okay.
Sure.
So is there anything else you can tell us about the bell, Mark?
Oh, I answered that. No, I can't.
Okay.
And it works fine.
All right. The next question from Tracy is, any idea what happened to the Hume School letters on the front?
No, I don't. I imagine they were in bad shape and were pried off and weren't saved as artifacts.
Oh, that's too bad. All right. I think that's it for the moment. I'm
Okay.
sure people will continue to ask questions and we'll pose them when we get them.
All right, great. So here we go again. Now we're looking at renovation and preservation again. Mark has showed you the timeline. It's been a while since we've done some major overhauls, and what we have been doing is all with the goal of creating a first-class museum. We believe that this county deserves a first-class museum that is accessible to all and tells the story of all the people of our county. One of the things I learned as social studies supervisor in the county is that the United States history, a lot of it occurred right here in Arlington. You think about John Smith, you think about Teddy Roosevelt, you think about Wilbur Wright, George Patton, they have all been at some time in our county. And so we have so much of a story to tell. And we have been gathering artifacts, 4,000 plus, and we want this museum to sustain over the years. And we want it to be there to really tell the story of such a great county that we live in, that's so historical itself. So along those lines, what we did is we were able to hire a feasibility study. And we were very, very fortunate that we were able to link up with the Milner Preservation Group, and they're part of the MTFA, which is an Arlington architectural firm. We really were very pleased. We got several bids, but we're really pleased to use an Arlington firm, and they were very excited to do a property right in Arlington also. What we have been doing because of funding and things like that is we've been doing a lot of Band-Aid fixing, and now we really felt that it was time to really step up and see what our museum looked like and what we could do to make it a better museum and really continue to tell the story in an updated museum. So we hired the Milner Group, and they came in, and there's a picture of them working on their study of the outside building. And we asked them for 2 phases. We asked them, what do we need to do to preserve this building? And then what can we do to expand and to renovate to give us more opportunity to exhibit what we have? So they have been they worked for about 8 months. We started with them in the fall, and they would inspect and they would talk to us and they would inspect and get input. We had a small committee that worked with them. And we just got the report about a week ago. And the good news to them is they believe we have a jewel of a building. We agree. We love our little museum. We believe it's structurally sound, and that's what they said, that overall, it has really withstood for a building from the 1890s. They do believe it requires some significant preservation work. And so they presented those recommendations for preservation, but they also gave us some ideas for renovation, which we're pretty excited about. And we had decided as a board of directors that we were going to address preservation needs first, but look on the long term on our goals for museum renovation. Our membership is growing, and we're really trying to look in the future of where we want to be in our museum 10 years down the line. So this is a project that we are kicking off this spring and summer. So let's start with the preservation. First of all, they identified that we really needed to replace or refurbish all our windows. And you can see in that upper picture there that that's one of our poorer windows. They're not all in that bad condition, but there is a lot of deterioration. And unfortunately, windows not only affect the temperature in the museum, but because the temperature affects the artifacts, the windows and repairing those windows are really key to allowing us to have good artifact storage, and also to protect the artifacts that are on display in the museum. So that was one of the things that they were most concerned about. The other thing is some water damage. You can see from the tile below that we've had some leakages. They found a little bit of standing water in parts of the basement. And so they really want to find a way to prevent that. One of the things that they noted is that there were drainage issues, and they believe that there are efforts, like we did have a French drain put in at one time, and there have been efforts to minimize the water, but those efforts need to be enhanced, and we do need to do some upgrades on that to prevent water damage from coming into the base surrounding the museum. The other thing is just some general correcting safety issues. For example, some of the locks need to be updated because they're not according to modern standards. So they needed to be, they wanted to look at like doors, and somebody coming in the door, like the ramp has to be a little smaller, or the door entry has to be changed a little bit. So those are some of the things that we need to be corrected. We also talked about accessibility, and that was something that was a concern to us because we want to make sure that the museum that we're going to have as we work on this project is a place that everybody can come, where they can see all parts of the museum. And then, as Mark has mentioned, storage has become a huge issue. With 4,000 plus artifacts, we are spending a large part. In fact, I have I think they said that that is the largest use of square footage in the museum. So one of the things that we are exploring is off-site storage, finding a place that we can put our artifacts that's in an archival condition storage facility, so that we can have the museum space, instead of being used for storage, can be used for more display. Some other issues that are going to be required are an upgraded HVAC system. Certainly we have one right now that is adequate, but it's old. It needs to be repaired. And as we extend and move exhibits upstairs, we're going to need more air conditioning, a more effective air conditioning system, an HVAC system. We also, as you saw in Mark's timeline, there have been some improvements in electrical and lighting, but they're still old-fashioned. By the standards that this was renovated, it's still been several decades since we've upgraded those. And so that is something that we are going to need to do also. Some of those upgrades, like HVAC and lighting and electrical, kind of blur the edges between preservation and renovation. Because then in a renovation, we'd be doing those, but those are things that are going to be important. One of our goals is to expand our exhibit space to the second floor. So what you see right here in this picture is those stairs are the only way to go to the second floor. So in order to get, and we have some great space that we could free up there and have exhibits, we have explored with them the possibility of putting in an elevator on the back of our building that's historically blends with the facade and would allow us to move up and down between the first and second floor. Because what we want is we want everybody to have access to all our exhibit space. So that is something that we are also looking at. So we have a couple of drawings here, and this will give you some idea of what we're looking at. Here is our drawing of our basement, and these are renovation ideas. We're really going to not do much to our basement. Right now, our basement is used for non-archival storage, and that is what we would continue. You see down in the bottom right, there is a bathroom there. We're going to remove it. We're not really using it down there. We're putting things in the basement that can be stored that we don't have to have special temperatures for. So we're going to leave the basement as it is. One of the things that we know about the basement is it is not the full length of the museum. We could dig in and make a huge basement, but it is not feasible, economically feasible to do that. So therefore, we're going to leave the basement it is, and we're not even considering having an elevator go down into the basement, because the basement is just going to be used for non-archival storage. This is our first floor option, and these are designs that we picked as we are moving forward. Certainly we have the ability to adjust these as needed, but this is the board of directors has looked at this and identified that these are the things that we are interested in. So for those of you that saw those ironworks where you enter the museum, in our renovation, you would enter the museum to a wide entry. It'd be the same entry point, but ahead of you, currently there's a big wall. That wall would be removed, and across there it would be a glass opening, and with doors that would allow us to lock and unlock the museum. And then you would walk in to that space and have the entire floor open to exhibits. If you've been in there now, you know that currently it's also a little conference area. It's also a little mini kitchen, but this would open it up to entire space of exhibits. You also notice as you enter the building to the right that we have 2 bathrooms. Currently, we have a bathroom that is also accessible to handicap, but we want to improve that. So we would have 2 bathrooms there, and one would be an ADA, American with Disabilities Act compliant bathroom. The only change that we have made as a society into this drawing is we have identified that we would like access to the bathroom to be before you go into the museum. Currently, you have to go in the museum and walk around to the bathroom, and we have asked for that to be changed because we host events. We have teas, we have activities. We had a wedding this year at the museum, and it would be lovely to be able to close off the museum there and then allow people to use the restroom for an outside visit without having to worry about any problems with the museum being open. So that is a little change that we made in this drawing. So currently this is museum space, and we are showing a lot of exhibits there, but the exciting thing is in a renovation, we would have a complete other exhibit space. So some of you have gone up to the 2nd floor. I bet a lot of you have. Excuse me. This was what our 2nd floor we are envisioning will look like in the new renovation. One, we're going to keep the classroom. We want to keep it set up as if it looked like when Hume was a school, excuse me. But we've allowed ourselves the whole rest of the area for more exhibit space and for a meeting room. So you see up there, we'd have temporary exhibits. Those would be rotating. Perhaps it would be partnerships that we did where somebody else in the county was displaying something and was going to bring it in and display it in our museum. So we could use those for temporary exhibits. To the right, we have a meeting room. We are exploring, like you see right now, that there is a door there. We are exploring whether we want movable walls so that we could take that meeting room and pull open those walls and then have that whole big area like it's an assembly area. That would be close to the original use of it because this upstairs was the assembly hall, and we could potentially do that. But we do want a meeting room for smaller groups and activities. And then we also have added a little bit of difference to this drawing. In the bottom right-hand corner, we have asked for a small kitchen because we do have events that require some kitchen. And so we have asked for a small kitchen to be there. So that is the exciting things that we are getting ready to do. And where we are right now is we are meeting. I have the smaller Milner group. We're actually meeting next week to really dig into this very long report and start prioritizing we know we need preservation first, but of all the preservation tasks, which ones are we going to prioritize? We also need to kick off a capital fundraising drive because we want to raise money for this preservation and renovation. We're hoping our membership can help get us involved with that. But most importantly, even while we're preserving and renovating, we want to continue to tell Arlington's story. Our events are going to keep on going. We're opening our museums. And, you know, you may be aware we are on the radio now with a daily Arlington history blurb, and we're promoting through social media all the good things that go on in Arlington throughout history. So those are our exciting steps, and I'm certainly open to any questions that you might have, or anybody else that's on the Milner group that would like to chime in if there's something I needed to add. Annette?
Nothing new, but people will be happy to take your questions or your comments.
Okay, so, and I think right now we can certainly, people can unmute and turn on their video. And we'd be happy to take any ideas, questions, thoughts that you have. It's a quiet group. So Duke Banks has a question.
Yes, very fine presentation, but I was wondering roughly what's the dollar amount that the group decided, you know, would be needed, and what are the benchmarks, and in terms of the two phases, you know, renovation and preservation, to get an idea of what type of fundraising we need.
Yeah, we haven't dug that much into it. We just got the cost estimates. One of the things I do know in talking with Milner is that if we do it as one big project, it's going to be more economical, because the blurring of lines is going to be some of the things that we're going to have to do to preserve. If we did it as part of a renovation, then you're not having the kind of the double cost. But I think we're looking, at about $1.5 million. The preservation certainly less than that, and that is why we want to prioritize the preservation first. One of the things that we do know is that when you're preserving a historical building, the things you do to it are going to have to be, they have to align with the historical considerations. So we have certain products and things like that that we have to use to make it, to keep the building historically accurate.
So Elise wants to know, what do you think the time frame is for having this all done?
These are great questions that we don't know because we haven't sat down as a group, but you know, we are looking at visioning over the next decade is really what we're doing. You know, we would like to see preservation, and I think really a lot of our work will really depend on the fundraising that we're able to do. We have some good ideas for fundraising. We would certainly be very open to any of our AHS membership that have some expertise that could lend us guidance, but we are looking into different avenues for fundraising, and that is going to really determine, as life is, you do things that you have money for. So that is really going to determine the trajectory of how we're going to move through this process. Other questions? Charlie.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So the Aurora Hills Women's Club and the neighborhood groups, are they excited about this? Might they pitch in, or are they worried about increased traffic or something? Is that?
Well, I have talked to the Aurora Hills. I met with them about a week ago, and I did chat with them about it. And we are at the very beginning of this whole process. So it's something that it's going to be a more inclusive of really including the neighbors, but we're just starting with, like I said, the report came last week. We felt like the annual meeting was a time that we really wanted to let our membership know But those are all the things that are really important that we're going to need to do as we begin this project for sure. Other questions? It's a quiet group tonight.
Well, 1.5 million is daunting.
It is daunting.
And I think it really illustrates the point that when you have a unique building like this, you have to continue to take care of it. It is something that if we want to keep historic property, we have to take care of historic properties.
Yeah, and I think that it's, you know, it's a challenge when you, because we do not receive funding. And so it is a challenge because all the work that we do, we fundraise for. And so I think that that is something that can be a challenge. However, I do believe that there are businesses in the county that might be interested. I mean, I think this is a gem and we'd like to see, you know, this is a case we take to the Arlington people. I believe that we have a pretty amazing story to tell about Arlington County. And I believe that we have a beautiful gem of a museum that can tell that story. And I think it's really taking that case to the people and to the public, to our membership, and getting people on board for doing this. We know it's not an overnight thing, but we know that just like, you know, as Mark showed you that great picture of, there was, you know, trash all over the floor, there were animals living there, and those first members of the Arlington Historical Board, who really did not have anything except a desire to turn it into a museum. And look what we have now. We have this beautiful building that they have really kept structurally sound. We just need to do the preservation and renovation of it. So I believe that, you know, kind of we stand on the shoulders of others that have gone before us, and you know, that is what we do, and we're visioning and we're excited about it, and we're looking to take this to the Arlington people and try to get some momentum and some excitement in the county for this project. Charlie, is that you again, or you raising your hand?
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, well, I thank you for your time tonight. I'm